everyone, and welcome to another deep dive with us. We always love to uncover something new and fascinating, and today we're going to be taking a look at ancient libraries.
Ooh, that sounds cool.
Yeah, I thought you might like this one.
I do.
So our jumping off point is this article called The Secrets of the World's Oldest Libraries. And it's a great overview of...
It is a good one.
Yeah, it's a great overview of so many different libraries throughout history, but it also kind of dives into, what these libraries meant to the societies that they were in and the impact that the loss of so many of them has had on our, collective understanding of history.
Right. And I think sometimes we think of libraries as just these sort of static buildings, right?
Mm-hmm.
But these ancient libraries were so much more than just places to store scrolls and tablets.
Yeah, they were hubs of activity, weren't they?
They were vibrant centers of learning, debate, scholarship, and they really played a vital role in shaping the intellectual and cultural landscapes of their time.
Yeah, and I think, our goal today is to kind of really unearth those stories.
Yeah.
To go beyond just the historical facts and figures and really kind of get a sense of what life was like for the people who used these libraries and what kind of knowledge they held.
I think that's a great goal. And I think what's so fascinating about this topic is that it allows us to kind of step back and think about our own relationship with knowledge.
Yeah.
What do we value? How do we preserve it? And what happens when that knowledge is lost?
Yeah, great point. Okay, so let's start with the big one, right? The Library of Alexandria. I mean, it's almost mythical at this point.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
It's practically synonymous with the very idea of ancient knowledge.
Right. Like if you say ancient library, that's the first thing that pops into most people's minds.
Exactly, and for good reason. I mean, scholars estimate that it held hundreds of thousands of scrolls covering every field of knowledge imaginable. Mathematics, astronomy, medicine, philosophy, literature, you name it. Yep. It was probably there.
It's hard to even fathom that scale of knowledge, right? And what's so frustrating is that so much of it is lost to us.
It really is a tragedy. The destruction of the Library of Alexandria is one of the greatest intellectual losses in human history.
So let's talk about that destruction, because I think there are a lot of misconceptions about what actually happened. It wasn't just like one big fire that wiped it all out, right?
No, it was much more complex than that. It was really a series of events that unfolded over centuries. You had Julius Caesar's fire in 48 BC, which, while we don't know the full extent of the damage, it certainly played a role.
Right, and that was during his conflict with Pompey. But then even after that, the library continued to exist in some form, right?
It did, but it faced numerous challenges. There was a slow decline in funding and support, likely exacerbated by the rise of Christianity and the shifting political landscape.
And then there's the whole story with Theophilus in the 5th century destroying pagan temples.
Right. And while he wasn't directly targeting the library, it's likely that parts of it were damaged or destroyed during that period.
It's almost like a slow-motion train wreck watching this incredible repository of knowledge crumble away bit by bit.
Yeah. And the final blow came in 642 AD with the Arab conquest. Whatever remained of the library was likely lost during this period, although there's still debate among scholars about the exact circumstances.
And it just makes you wonder what was lost, right? I mean, we have fragments and accounts from other sources, but there's so much that we'll never know.
Exactly. We can only speculate about the scientific discoveries, the philosophical insights, the literary masterpieces that might have vanished forever. Some scholars believe that the loss of the Library of Alexandria set back human progress by centuries.
Yeah, it's a sobering thought, but it highlights the importance of knowledge preservation, right?
Absolutely. And it makes us appreciate the libraries and archives that we do have and the work that goes into protecting them.
Well, speaking of other libraries, let's move on to another fascinating example. The Library of Ashurbanipal in Nineveh.
Okay, so this one is very different from Alexandria in that we have actual physical remains.
Yeah, we're not just dealing with theories and fragments here. This is tangible evidence of ancient knowledge.
Exactly. The Library of Ashurbanipal was rediscovered in the 19th century, and it's considered one of the oldest surviving libraries in the world.
So what makes this library so unique? What allowed it to survive when so many others didn't?
Well, for one thing, the texts weren't written on scrolls. They were inscribed on clay tablets.
Oh, wow. So like those ancient Babylonian tablets you see in museums.
Exactly. And while those tablets are fragile, they're also surprisingly durable, especially compared to papyrus scrolls, which are much more susceptible to damage.
So this library housed thousands of these clay tablets, all inscribed with cuneiform script. Can you imagine the effort that went into creating and organizing this collection?
It's mind-boggling. And it speaks to the ambition and intellectual curiosity of Ashurbanipal himself.
Ashurbanipal. Who was he?
He was the last great king of Assyria. He ruled from 669 to 631 BC, and he was known for his military conquests, but also for his love of learning.
Oh, so he wasn't just a warrior king, he was a scholar too.
He believed that accumulating knowledge was essential to good governance, and he amassed a vast library covering a wide range of subjects.
What kind of subjects are we talking about?
Well, we have royal inscriptions, legal codes, medical texts, divination practices, astronomy, and even literature.
Oh, wow. So it's kind of like a snapshot of ancient Mesopotamian thought.
Exactly. And one of the most famous texts found in the library is the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that. Isn't that one of the oldest known works of literature?
It is. It tells the story of a king's quest for immortality, and it explores themes of life, death, friendship, and the human condition.
So it's a story that still resonates with us today, thousands of years later.
Absolutely. And it's just one example of the many treasures that were found in the Library of Ashurbanipal.
But it wasn't just about grand narratives like the Epic of Gilgamesh, was it? I mean, you mentioned legal codes and administrative records.
Right. The library also contained a lot of more mundane texts that give us insights into the everyday lives of the Assyrians.
So it wasn't just about collecting knowledge for knowledge's sake. There was a practical element to it as well.
Absolutely. Ashurbanipal saw knowledge as a source of power, and he used his library to consolidate his rule and legitimize his authority.
Knowledge is power, as they say. But sadly, even clay tablets couldn't withstand the fall of empires. What happened to the Library of Ashurbanipal?
Well, the Assyrian Empire fell in 612 BC, when Nineveh was sacked by a coalition of forces.
Oh, so the library was destroyed during the conquest.
Yes, much of it was lost in the ensuing chaos. But thankfully, some of the tablets survived, and they've given us an invaluable glimpse into the world of ancient Assyria.
It makes you wonder how different our understanding of history would be if more had survived.
It really does. But let's move on to a different part of the world. For our next stop, we're traveling to Timbuktu.
Timbuktu, that's a name that conjures up images of desert caravans and ancient trade routes.
It does, and it has a fascinating history.
Yeah.
Timbuktu is a major center of trade and scholarship in the medieval period.
And it's also home to some incredible libraries, right?
It is. The libraries of Timbuktu are a testament to the intellectual vibrancy of Africa, and they offer a unique perspective on the history of knowledge.
So tell us about these libraries. What makes them so special?
Well, unlike the libraries we've discussed so far, the libraries of Timbuktu are still in existence.
Really? They've survived all these centuries?
They have. They've faced their share of challenges, of course, but they've managed to endure.
Wow, that's amazing. So what kind of texts do they contain?
They house thousands of manuscripts, mostly in Arabic, covering a wide range of subjects. We're talking about mathematics, astronomy, medicine, law, theology, history, literature, and more.
And these manuscripts date back to the medieval period.
Many of them do. They offer us a glimpse into a world of scholarship that's often overlooked in traditional narratives of history.
So they challenge our Eurocentric view of intellectual history.
They do. They show that knowledge and scholarship were flourishing in Africa long before the European Renaissance.
That's a really important point. And what's so fascinating about these manuscripts is that they're not just copies of texts from other cultures. They represent a distinct African intellectual tradition.
Right. They include original works by African scholars, as well as commentaries and interpretations of texts from the Islamic world.
So they give us a much more nuanced and complex understanding of the history of knowledge.
They do.
Yeah.
And they highlight the interconnectedness of different cultures and intellectual traditions.
It's amazing to think about these manuscripts surviving for centuries, passed down from generation to generation.
It is. And it speaks to the importance that these communities placed on preserving their cultural heritage.
But it hasn't been easy, has it? I mean, I imagine these libraries have faced numerous threats over the years.
Oh, absolutely. During the colonial era, many manuscripts were hidden away or smuggled out of the country to protect them from being destroyed or taken by European powers.
So the preservation of these manuscripts was an act of resistance.
It was. And it continues to be a challenge today. The libraries of Timbuktu face threats from conflict, climate change, and lack of resources.
So it's an ongoing struggle to preserve this invaluable heritage.
It is. But thankfully, there are people and organizations working tirelessly to protect these manuscripts and make them accessible to scholars and the public.
That's good to hear, because these libraries are not just important for Africa, they're part of our shared human heritage.
Exactly. They belong to all of us, and it's our responsibility to ensure that they're preserved for future generations.
Well, I think that's a great place to pause for now. We've covered a lot of ground today, but we've only just scratched the surface of this fascinating topic. We'll continue our exploration of ancient libraries in part 2 of this deep dive, so stay tuned.
I can't wait. It's really amazing to think about how these libraries, despite facing so many threats over the centuries, have managed to hold on to these fragments of the past.
I know, right? It's like they're whispering secrets across time.
They really are.
And speaking of secrets, it makes you wonder what other hidden gems might be out there just waiting to be rediscovered,
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, there's always that possibility of unearthing a lost masterpiece or a scientific text that could completely change our understanding of history.
Right. Like imagine stumbling upon a forgotten scroll containing a lost play by Sophocles, or, a detailed account of a historical event that we thought we knew everything about.
Oh, that would be incredible.
It's exciting to think about all the possibilities.
Uh,
But, so far we've been talking about these grand institutional libraries, like Alexandria and Ashurbanipal's library. But what about libraries on a smaller scale? What can they tell us about the intellectual lives of individuals in the ancient world?
That's a great question. And you're right, we tend to focus on these massive collections, but sometimes the most fascinating stories come from smaller, more personal libraries.
Yeah, give us an example.
Okay, so have you ever heard of the Villa of the Papyri?
The Villa of the Papyri. The name rings a bell, but I can't quite place it.
Okay, well, picture this. A Roman villa buried by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD.
Oh, wow, okay.
And this villa housed a library filled with papyrus scrolls that were perfectly preserved by the volcanic ash.
Wait, so it's like Pompeii, but for books? A library frozen in time?
Exactly.
That's incredible. Where was this villa located?
It was in Herculaneum, another Roman town near Pompeii. And when Vesuvius erupted, both towns were buried under this thick layer of volcanic debris.
Oh, wow. So what happened to the scrolls? I mean, were they destroyed by the heat?
Surprisingly, no. They were charred and brittle, but many of them survived.
Wow, and they've been excavated.
Yes, excavations began in the 18th century, and over 1,800 scrolls have been recovered so far.
1,800 scrolls. That's amazing. But I imagine deciphering them is a huge challenge.
Oh, it is. Many of the scrolls are so fragile they can't even be unrolled without disintegrating. But scholars are using advanced imaging techniques to virtually unwrap the scrolls and decipher their contents.
That's incredible. It's like something out of a science fiction movie.
It is pretty amazing. So what do we learn from these scrolls? Well, the majority of the deciphered texts are philosophical works primarily from the Epicurean school of thought.
Epicureanism. Remind me what that's all about.
Well, Epicureanism emphasized living a life of pleasure, but not in the hedonistic sense we often think of today. It was more about seeking tranquility and freedom from pain and fear, living in accordance with nature.
Oh, okay. So it's kind of ironic that a library buried in such a dramatic way would contain texts focused on finding peace and serenity.
Right. There's definitely a certain poetry to it.
And you said that most of the texts are from the Epicurean school.
Yes, and many of them seem to be written by Philodemus, a Greek philosopher who lived in the 1st century BC.
So it wasn't just a random collection of philosophical texts. This was a library with a specific focus.
It seems that way. Which makes you wonder who the owner of this villa was and why they were so drawn to Epicureanism.
Right. Like, what was their story? Do we have any clues?
Well, some scholars believe the villa might have belonged to Lucius Calpurnius, Piso Caecilius, Julius Caesar's father-in-law.
Wow. So this library potentially connects us to some of the most influential figures in Roman history.
It does. And it makes you think about the conversations and debates that might have taken place within those walls.
It's fascinating to think about how these ancient spaces were not just repositories of knowledge, but also centers of intellectual and social life.
Exactly. And the Villa of the Papyri is a great example of that.
So the story of this library isn't over, is it? I mean, are excavations still ongoing?
Yes, they are. New scrolls are still being discovered, and technology is constantly evolving, giving us hope that even more of these texts can be deciphered.
That's so cool. It's like a treasure hunt that spans centuries.
It really is. And each new discovery has the potential to add another piece to the puzzle of Roman intellectual life.
Okay, so we've gone from the ashes of Vesuvius to the grandeur of Alexandria and the personal library of the Villa of the Papyri. Where to next?
Let's travel to the heart of the Islamic Golden Age, to Baghdad and the House of Wisdom.
The House of Wisdom. Now that's a name that evokes a sense of wonder and intellectual curiosity.
It does. And it was a truly remarkable institution. It wasn't just a library in the traditional sense. It was a center for translation research and scholarly exchange.
So it was a place where knowledge from different cultures and traditions came together.
Exactly. The House of Wisdom flourished under the Abbasid Caliphate in the 9th and 10th centuries. and the Abbasid caliphs were great patrons of learning.
So they supported the translation of texts from other cultures?
They did. They recognized the value of preserving and translating texts from ancient Greece, Persia, India, and other civilizations.
Wow. So it was a deliberate effort to gather and make accessible the wisdom of the world.
It was. And scholars from diverse backgrounds, Muslims, Christians, Jews, Persians, Indians, all work side by side in the House of Wisdom.
That's incredible. It sounds like a truly cosmopolitan environment, a place where ideas flowed freely across cultural boundaries.
It was. And it had a profound impact on the development of Islamic thought and science.
So what were some of the key areas of study at the House of Wisdom?
Well, it was a major center for mathematics, astronomy, medicine, philosophy, and more thinkers like Al-Khwarizmi, considered the father of algebra, made groundbreaking contributions to mathematics there.
Wow. And what about medicine?
Al-Razi, a pioneer in medicine, wrote extensively on smallpox and measles. And Ibn Sina, known as Avicenna in the West, produced his influential medical encyclopedia, The Canon of Medicine.
The Canon of Medicine, I've heard of that. Wasn't that a standard medical text in Europe for centuries?
It was. It's a testament to the lasting influence of the House of Wisdom.
So this wasn't just an Islamic institution. Its knowledge spread far and wide.
Exactly. And it had a lasting impact on the intellectual history of the world. But sadly, like so many great libraries, the House of Wisdom met a tragic end.
What happened?
In 1258, Baghdad was sacked by the Mongol forces under Hulagu Khan. The House of Wisdom, along with countless other cultural treasures, was destroyed.
Another instance of war leading to the loss of invaluable knowledge.
It is. But even in its destruction, the House of Wisdom left an indelible mark on the world. The knowledge that was translated and disseminated from there spread throughout the Islamic world and eventually made its way to Europe, influencing the Renaissance and the Scientific Revolution.
So its legacy lived on even after its physical destruction.
It did. And it reminds us that knowledge can transcend time and geographical boundaries.
Well said. I think we've covered a lot of ground in this part of our deep dive.
We have. We've journeyed from the ashes of Vesuvius to the bustling streets of Baghdad, exploring libraries that represent different cultures, different eras, and different ways of knowing.
Yeah, and it's been fascinating to see the common threads that run through these stories, the human desire to collect, preserve, and share knowledge, and the challenges and threats that these libraries face.
It's been a real journey of discovery.
It has. But our journey isn't over yet. We have one more part of our deep dive to go. So stay tuned as we explore what these ancient libraries mean for us today and how they can inspire us to be better stewards of knowledge in our own time.
Wow, we've really covered some incredible ground, haven't we? I mean, from the legendary Library of Alexandria to the personal collection at the Villa of the Papyri, and from the collaborative spirit of Baghdad's House of Wisdom to the resilient libraries of Timbuktu.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey through time and across cultures.
It really has, and each stop along the way has kind of highlighted, different aspects of how humans have sought to collect, preserve, and share knowledge throughout history.
Right, and also the challenges and the threats that these libraries have faced, whether it's natural disasters or simply the passage of time.
Yeah, exactly. But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to kind of shift gears a little bit and bring the focus back to you, the listener, know, because at the end of the day, why does all this ancient history really matter to us today? That's a great question, and it's one that I think we should all ask ourselves. It's easy to kind of view these ancient libraries as just relics of the past. Something to be studied and admired from a distance.
Yeah, like interesting, but not necessarily relevant to our lives.
Right. But I think that would be a mistake. Because I think these ancient libraries actually offers a lot more than just, a glimpse into history. They can serve as a mirror reflecting our own relationship with knowledge.
A mirror, huh? I like that analogy. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Sure. So think about the immense effort that went into creating these libraries, right? The meticulous copying of scrolls, the carving of clay tablets, the construction of these grand buildings to house these collections.
Yeah, I mean, it's mind-boggling when you consider the resources and the dedication involved.
Right. And it really speaks to the profound value that these ancient societies placed on knowledge. It was seen as a treasure worth preserving, protecting, and passing on to future generations.
Yeah, I mean, they clearly saw knowledge as something essential to their survival and their prosperity.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder if we, in the digital age, with all the information at our fingertips, have lost some of that reverence for knowledge,
That's a good question. I mean, do we take it for granted now?
It's possible. We live in a world of information overload where knowledge is often seen as disposable, something to be consumed quickly and then forgotten. But these ancient libraries, they remind us that knowledge is a precious resource. It requires care, attention, a long-term perspective.
Right, so it's not just about accumulating data. It's about cultivating wisdom and understanding and the ability to apply what we know to make the world a better place.
Exactly. And that's why I think it's so important to study these ancient libraries, because they can inspire us to be more thoughtful, more intentional about our own relationship with knowledge.
Yeah, they can remind us of the power of knowledge, but also its fragility.
Right, and the importance of preserving it and sharing it.
Well said. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are some of the key takeaways that you hope our listeners will walk away with?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that the pursuit of knowledge is a timeless and universal human endeavor. You know, we see it reflected in these ancient libraries just as we see it reflected in our own lives today.
Right, it's that same curiosity, that same drive to understand the world around us.
Exactly, and I think these ancient libraries can also inspire us to be more critical, more discerning consumers of information.
Yeah, in this age of misinformation and fake news, it's more important than ever to be able to evaluate sources and think critically about the information we're presented with.
Absolutely, and I think these ancient libraries also remind us of the importance of collaboration and the sharing of knowledge. You know, the House of Wisdom is a great example of that. Scholars from different cultures and traditions coming together to translate texts and advance our collective understanding of the world.
Yeah, that's a powerful reminder that knowledge knows no boundaries.
It doesn't.
Yeah.
And I think that's a message that's more relevant today than ever before.
Well said. So to our listeners out there, I encourage you to keep exploring, keep asking questions, keep seeking out knowledge from diverse sources.
Yeah, don't be afraid to challenge the narratives that you're presented with. Seek out multiple perspectives. Engage in thoughtful discussions.
And remember, the pursuit of knowledge is a journey, not a destination. So enjoy the ride.
Absolutely. Happy exploring, everyone.
And that's a wrap on this deep dive into ancient libraries. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.